Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Welcome, everyone. If you enjoy the show, please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast listening platform and YouTube. You can now also check out the full video episode on X. Please also consider sharing your favorite episodes and leaving a review. If you do that and tag me or send me a screenshot, I will enter you in a monthly raffle for a free 30-minute consultation with me. For full episode details, including notes, timestamps, transcripts, and the show Patreon page, and other ways to support the show, please head over to my website at zachbitter.com. There you can find all my coaching services, including some new offerings for 2025. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter, where I have been publishing my training journal weekly, as well as other topic-based posts. If you have any questions or feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on my website or at hpopodcast@gmail.com. A big thanks to Element Electrolytes, Delta G Ketones, ProBio Nutrition, and Training Peaks for supporting the podcast. I have links and promotions to these brands in the show notes, but you can also get them here. If you want to check out Element Electrolytes, head over to drinklmnt.com/HPO. That'll get you a free sample pack with your first purchase. At deltagketones.com, if you enter promo code BITTER20, you will get 20% off your next purchase. And if you go to probionutrition.com, enter promo code ENDURANCE, and that will get you 20% off your next purchase. All right, everyone, welcome back. So today I have a solo episode for you. With this episode, I'm going to dive into a couple things. One is going to be an update on my high carbohydrate experiment and how that's been going. I'm now 14 weeks into it. So the last time I talked about this on the podcast was after the first 8 weeks. So if you're curious about how that all took place and began, I would suggest checking that episode out. It's episode 452 if you haven't listened to that one, as I will be kind of adding to that or referencing back to it a bit. So this will be more or less a standalone though, so you don't necessarily need it, but if you're just maybe a little more curious about some specifics within the deeper dive to that, I would suggest checking that one out. The other will just be a bit of a training recap because I'm right in the middle of a peaking phase for my next 100-mile race, or it's technically a 12-hour race. My hope is it's a 100-mile race, I guess. If things go well, I should be able to hit 100 miles before I get to 12 hours, and then it'll be a double dip with the 12-hour timed event as well as a 100-mile effort as well. And that's coming up quite soon. I'm actually about to start taper for it. By the time this episode's out, I'll be heading into the following week being the first week of the 2-week taper for that one. So one of the reasons why I wanted to do a high carb update along with a training recap together is one of the missing pieces to the puzzle on the first one was just a little bit more time spent, and then also how I maybe respond to it during this more unique phase of training where I'm skewing things more towards ultra long run development and the specifics that go into what I do during training around peaking for the 100 miles versus what I do in the weeks and months leading into that phase of training. So I think it will offer a little bit of a different look into it with that kind of context in place. So the first thing I'll share about it too is I did get a blood panel done right at 12 weeks, which was the time frame in which I wanted to get the first look at, see what was going on inside. I thought 12 weeks would probably be enough time on high carbohydrate to at least begin to look at maybe what is going well, what is maybe in need of some improvement with that. I am still waiting for the results for that. I've been working with a company called Eternal, and once they get the blood panel results in, they're pairing me up with a dietitian to take a look at it and dive into maybe some adjustments that I could make to better optimize this approach, because my goal here is hopefully to put together the best possible high carbohydrate approach for me so that I can give it the best possible test on race day and tease out maybe where some of the differences are or benefits or trade-offs could possibly be between trying a high carbohydrate approach for 100 miles versus what I'd been doing the prior 14 years with all of my other 100-mile races, which was more lower carbohydrate approach to the training and racing inputs. So I'll start off with A little bit about how the training has shifted. So prior to this, on that last episode, I was in what I would call a little more of a traditional endurance training program where I was doing quite a bit of variety along the aerobic intensity spectrum with structured short intervals, structured long intervals. The short intervals I tend to pair to close to my VO2 max or my pace at VO2 max. Long intervals, I'm usually spending more time close to my lactate threshold. And then a more traditional long run, which is usually going to be between 2 to 3 hours, probably a little closer to 2, especially when I'm really fit. I'm usually easily getting into the 20-mile range in the early stages of 2 hours for those type of runs. So those are the framework workouts that I'm building around. Now that I shift away from that towards more 100-mile specific peaking, I start pulling back a little bit on the loading that I would do at some of those higher intensities along the aerobic intensity spectrum to make room for more volume spent closer to what we would likely call like zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. This means I'm doing more long runs in general, and I'm stretching some of them out too by both distance and total duration, and working on hitting a lot of that volume close to what I would like to be able to do on race day. So targeting 100-mile race day intensity. So an example of that would be last week I actually had my highest volume training week of the year where I hit right about 140 miles. It was 16 hours, 20 minutes of running. I spent a really big chunk of that in the like 620 to 640 range of pacing. And I had 3 sessions, 2 20-milers and 1 30-miler in there that were solo sessions that were all in that pace range. So I start to try to move as much volume as I can tolerate into that compartment to be able to just really start fine-tuning what I'll actually be doing on race day. That has also given me the ability to practice more race day specific fueling strategies. So with a lot of those runs, I've been targeting around 80 to 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour. That has been one of the things I've been the most interested in, is just how is my body going to respond to that, both from just how I feel, the performance, and digestion wise. Is that something that seems like it's going to be sustainable? Because inevitably, even with my longest run of 30 miles, which I did in about 3 hours and 20 minutes, I'm still going to have to 3-4x that on race day. So if I'm noticing like that it is not reasonably tolerating the nutrition input at that point, then I have to be concerned with how that's going to play out by adding all the race day elements as well as pushing that total volume out much further. So far, it's gone quite well. And I've been gravitating more towards a 2-to-1 ratio for carbohydrate types. So 2-to-1 glucose to fructose. I'm finding that since I'm not really pushing past 100 grams yet, or I may never, we'll see how this all plays out, I just haven't found that I really need to move up to 1 to 0.8 ratio, which is what we're typically seeing now when endurance athletes that are trying to hit these really high carbohydrate numbers. I talked to David Roche about this on the episode that he was on recently. For those interested that haven't listened to that one, that was episode 457. He likes 1 to 0.8, but that makes sense to me because I think what we're seeing now with cyclists and ultra marathon runners pushing these higher numbers, when you get up to those numbers like David's hitting 150 grams per hour, especially as you get into the race, like a few hours into the race, it seems that digestively that may be a little bit more tolerable. But for me, I tend to feel better when I'm at 2-to-1. And since I'm still sitting at that 80 to 100 gram spot, I haven't seen a real big need to start structuring it at that 1 to 0.8, at least not yet. Obviously, I'll have a way more close look at it after my next race at the Equalizer Endurance Run in a couple of weeks here, and perhaps that will make me change my approach. But right now, 2-to-1's been working quite well. I wouldn't say I have any real fears of it not being sustainable. I haven't really noticed any digestive discomfort changes from, say, hour 1 to hour 2 to hour 3 or anything like that. I did have one long run that I did on the track that I had some digestive issues, but it wasn't anything crazy, and I'm almost certain it was something that I did the day prior versus the fueling because it started right out the gate. Like I hadn't even really begun my intra-workout fueling strategy, and it really just resulted in me stopping to use the bathroom a few times, whereas normally I would like to be able to do that in a workout maybe once, and then on race day, hopefully I'll have most of that taken care of prior to the race because I'll be getting up a little bit earlier than I normally would for a typical long run and get myself sorted with enough time before the start of the race. But from a historical standpoint, most of my highest performing 100 milers have been met with 2 or 3 stops along the way to use the bathroom. So that's not something that I assume is going to go away. In fact, I usually build that into my pacing plan so that I know, all right, I'm going to probably require at least 3, maybe up to 5 minutes of non-moving time during one of these 100-milers for stops like that. So that is built in to some degree to be able to tolerate a little bit of that on race day. Obviously, I don't want that to start to unravel to the point where now I'm stopping like say 10 times and wasting 20 minutes or something like that because the digestion is becoming intolerable. I think that would end up being a scenario where the performance benefit that I may get from higher carbohydrate would likely be washed out by just making it less of a usable tool for me at the current state I'm in terms of just keeping moving is probably the best way to maybe just look at that in general. So right now I'm pretty confident that at a baseline of 80 grams, I should be able to do that. And I think there will be moments or hours in that race where things are going down real smooth that I can push up to 100. But my goal right now is to continue in that 80 to 100 gram framework. And then on race day, just try to make sure I'm getting at least 80. And then when things feel good, maybe push up to 100 on a few spots if I can tolerate it. So that's where that is at. In terms of the performance side of that, I would say I haven't necessarily felt like it's noticeably better than the best I got to with low carb. So there's a lot of moving parts in that. I'm training in Austin now. When I had my best builds for 100-mile races historically, those were all in Phoenix. So there's some variance there when it comes to just the weather patterns in Phoenix versus Austin. The terrain here in Austin and Phoenix is a little bit different. So I've tried to look more closely at more controlled settings like track long runs. Right now, I only have 2 track long runs. And really the only reason why I'm doing track long runs right now versus the other long run spot I've been using, which is basically a 2 to 2.5 mile loop that I'll do on the roads, is because I plan to also do Desert Solstice in December. So I'm starting to lay some of the groundwork for being able to tolerate being out on a track for very long periods of time and doing some of my workouts there. But in terms of comparing to terrain from Phoenix to Austin, that tends to be the best spot to do it because it's just more controlled than, say, the canal path I used to be able to run on in Phoenix for non-track surface flat long runs and the spots I got here in Austin. So I would say like when I was doing those long runs leading into my fastest 100-miler, they're looking pretty similar in terms of just like the pacing, the effort. If anything, I might notice that it's a little bit easier to feel like I'm pushing down at the end of a long run now when I'm hitting those higher carb intakes during it. Not to the degree where I would be like saying it's like knocking it out of the park different. So that is worth noting. I think there's likely some reason to maybe just think about it through the lens of there's going to be some variances too with like footwear choices and things like that, where these prior blocks that I'm comparing to were also before I was wearing any sort of premium foam shoe. In fact, my fastest 100-mile race actually came in a pretty traditional, what you'd maybe look at as a kind of a marathon racing flat versus some of the new plated foam, premium foam shoes that I'll be wearing going forward in these races. So to some degree, that may cloud the results a little bit from a performance standpoint. But generally speaking, I would say if I'm noticing anything, it's likely that I maybe have a little more urge to run faster during the last part of the run, but not to the degree where I feel like it was being forced comparatively. Now, that's all being compared to the best experience I had on low carb. So if I just compare that to my prior training cycles here in Austin, it's been noticeably better. I'm definitely in the best shape I've been since moving to Austin, and the data is basically very objectively pointing that direction in the long runs, the workouts, pretty much across the board. So depending on how you view that from a performance standpoint, it may be something where some people are like, hey, we'd rather you compare that to the most recent because that's more likely to be your current state versus branching back to a few years to where I was back in Phoenix and at my heights on the racing side of things and training side of things while on low carb there. So just worth noting. Just a quick reminder, Training Peaks is one of the best tools for monitoring your training progress and my go-to tool when coaching individuals. At Training Peaks, you can get deep into the data, assess training load, recovery, and easily monitor progress across all training intensities. It is a perfect example of a program that takes much of the guesswork out of your training and coaching experience. I really love assessing intervals on Training Peaks. One of the first things I'll do when I get back from a run is I'll hop onto Training Peaks, unpack all that data, and just see how each of those individual intervals went and really dive into where I could maybe improve in the future. So if you're interested in getting deeper into your own training data, head over to trainingpeaks.com/HPO podcast. Probio Nutrition is my go-to supplement for all my electrolytes and digestive needs. The reason I like it is it was developed by my good friend, Dr. Mark Bubbs. He has had a lot of experience working with successful individuals that have busy, active lifestyles, including Olympians, NBA basketball players, professional hockey players. One of the things he noticed was a lot of supplements were not only mislabeled, but not very effective. So he went about to try to lower the friction point there by making it as easy as having one scoop of Probio Nutrition every day. I will take it with either water, smoothie, or mix it in with my yogurt once per day, and then I'm done. And I can rest at ease knowing that along with a good diet, I'll have all those micronutrients and digestive needs met. Head over to probionutrition.com and enter promo code ENDURANCE for 20% off your next order. Delta G ketones is my go-to exogenous ketone source. I will take these after my big training sessions as well as during my long runs at lower intensity and longer races at lower intensity. You can get 20% off your next purchase by going to deltagketones.com and entering promo code BITTER20. Element Electrolytes is my go-to electrolyte source. I know that I lose 614 milligrams of electrolytes for every liter of sweat. So on those training sessions, especially the hot days, I'll make sure I have a packet of one of their multiple flavors in with my fluids. Or if I'm looking for a refreshing post-workout beverage or just staying on top of electrolytes throughout the day, I will often lean to their cans of Element Sparkle, which are a very tasty treat after a hot training run. If you want to get a free sample pack with your next purchase, head over to drinklmnt.com/HPO. The other thing that I've been paying close attention to that I mentioned on that first episode is just sleep. So one thing I noticed really soon when I switched to high carb was I was sleeping less, but continuously still. So one of the benefits I found personally when I switched to low carb is it seemed to help me with sleep consistency, meaning I was better able to go to bed at night, stay in bed, and just wake up roughly eight and a half hours later, which is historically about what my body would usually require when I'm given it the opportunity to have it. Whereas prior to that, I was getting in a situation where I would need, say, 10 hours to be able to get 8 hours of sleep. I haven't had that experience for the most part yet. When I switched to high carb, my sleep duration dropped by like maybe 30 to 60 minutes, but I didn't notice any downstream negative effects from that. I still felt like I was waking up with, if anything, better energy, requiring less caffeine, and feeling like I didn't have any fatigue during the day or sleep pressure that was causing me concerns as to thinking, okay, I'm just not getting enough sleep. So that was just kind of an interesting thing that I wasn't sure if that was going to continue or if it was maybe the new normal for me on high carb versus low carb. For whatever reason, maybe I was just requiring a little bit less. The interesting thing to me was I hit a stretch of maybe 2 weeks where that all shifted. And then I was getting, like, not every night, but a few nights a week, I would just have really disrupted sleep where I would wake up a bunch, have a hard time falling back asleep, and didn't feel sustainable at all. So I was getting a little nervous that I was starting to trend back towards kind of my experience on high carb when I first got into ultra marathon running before switching to low carb. Ironically, I just pushed through for the most part and just said, okay, let's just give this some more time and see maybe there's still just some transition phase abnormality going on here that I need to work through. And after about that couple of weeks, that all corrected. And it also corrected to the degree where now I'm sleeping closer to my traditional time frame of 8.5 hours. So now for the last 2 weeks, I've had like really consistent, straight through the night sleep, closer to the old markers I had. So it seems to almost have normalized back to where it was when it was at its best. And I'm no longer getting that benefit of an extra 30 to 60 minutes per day by not having to sleep as long. Perhaps that's good in the long term in the sense that maybe that is really what I do need and I should be trying to get that when I can. And if the dietary inputs allow me to do that, then that's going to be a notch in that side of things as being a good thing from a dietary standpoint in terms of how it's impacting kind of the sleep side of things. So I'm going to keep monitoring that obviously and see if and how that changes over the coming weeks and months and however long I end up running this for. But right now it's in a great spot. So I'm really happy with where that is all ended up and where hopefully it will continue to go. The other thing I'll say too is just generally speaking, the questions that I've gotten a lot since that first episode is just generally speaking, what are some main differences I'm seeing? And the way I've been describing it is low carb is a very durable approach in my opinion. Like when I get that pinned down and consistent, I find that things are very predictable and there's a little less moving parts logistically. So for example, if I go out for a base run that's like maybe the high end of zone 2, once I get that dialed up and going, very little changes as long as I stay hydrated. I'm able to just get into that and there's very little variance between perceived effort at the goal target pace within those sort of runs. Or the other way to maybe look at it is like the perceived effort I produce is a pretty precise pace that gets turned out from it. With high carb, I tend to feel like that's just way more volatile, where if I'm out there for a run, I might have a pretty sudden like drop in pace at a given effort, or feel like I'm working noticeably harder to produce a pace, or I might feel like I'm almost fighting to not go too fast, where I have a specific training goal in mind and I don't necessarily do myself favor by deviating from that on the fast end either. So it does take a little bit more of attention, I would say, to just make sure that I'm hitting the right spots. A lot of the like lower end stuff where I feel like I'm working harder for the pace I'm trying to produce is cleared up when I'm just consistently hitting fuel. So to the degree that really matters is just probably a logistical preference for the most part in terms of if I want to be fueling during some of these runs that tend to be a little bit longer, like beyond 90 minutes, then it's just way more imperative for me to make sure I'm hitting those fueling targets if I want to stay in that spot where I'm feeling really good during the run and that perceived effort is matching at the pace that I want it to. So that's worth noting. The other thing I'll add about that too is I've been doing a really big volume towards running these last couple of weeks where I shifted away from the bike entirely the last 2 weeks. And now I'm midway through week 3 of doing that. My goal there really is just, I want to try to make sure that I'm getting enough of the mechanical loading that is just going to be a factor in terms of how sustainable I'm able to maintain pace for 100 miles. I think the bike has been a huge asset for me staying healthy and staying strong in different areas that I otherwise would maybe get a little bit weaker on from going through some of these training cycles that were just primarily or entirely run based. But I do think there's probably still some reason for me to take periods of time when I'm peaking, say 2 to 3 weeks, to try to move that volume entirely to running so that I'm able to hit some of those higher volume running weeks, get that mechanical durability to be able to tolerate the specifics and not necessarily drive fatigue from a non-specific input that could take away from me being able to maximize the amount of time I'm able to spend at goal 100-mile pace or intensity for as much of the volume during the week as I can tolerate. So the way that sort of played out is I did a week of 127 miles. I think that one was like in the low 15-hour range. And then last week was 140, was 1620. This week will be similar to this last one, maybe a little bit more. And that has been the biggest training shift. I've been maintaining some speed work where I'll do like some threshold work maybe once per week. And then on a couple of my longer sessions, I'll do a fast finish where I'm pushing down into the kind of high 5-minute range, just so I'm not entirely neglecting that. I'll do some like pickups or strides and things like that, or 200-meter reps at the end of a run from time to time too, just to try to touch some of those faster paced runs. So I'm not completely neglecting that either, but also not generating too much training fatigue from that to the degree where I can't get up the next day and put in a ton of volume, more along the lines of that kind of zone 1 through 3 framework that are going to be the more important intensities, or specific intensities, I should say, come race day. So that's been the way I've been structuring these weeks, and my body's been responding really well to it, to the degree where I would have been probably surprised, I would say, if you had asked me 3 or 4 weeks ago if I was going to be able to get in a couple weeks as big as this last week and this next one is going to be and feel as good as I have. So to whatever degree that the fueling is helping with that, those aren't historically high markers. I've done training cycles and builds with a peaking phase at those numbers or higher even in the past while on low carb too, but it is by far the most productive and highest volume from a running volume standpoint that I've been able to do since being here in Austin. So that's all promising and heading in the right direction. But my goal with that is that I will be bringing the bike back in. I'll bring it back in during the taper to remove some of the mechanical loading, as I definitely want to be recovered from that heading into the race day. And then as I kind of transition out of the equalizer back into training, and then eventually re-peaking again for Desert Solstice end of December, I'll be doing some biking in that interim there as I'm bouncing back from that first 100-miler and getting that mileage back to where I want it for Desert Solstice too. So that bike component is definitely going to remain a key component to my training. But if I have it the way I want it, it's going to be a spot where I can do these like maybe 3-week blocks where I'm peaking for the 100-mile and getting a little more exclusive with the running and building in some of that mechanical loading and really focusing a lot of my training load and energies towards the specifics that I'll be doing for that. So other than that, I would say I'm really interested to get the blood panel back because I think there's probably something I can optimize on. There's probably something where I don't think it'll be where I'd be like, oh, now I need to go back to low carb. I think it might be something, there's probably something in there where it's, here's the food groups you're using to hit the macronutrients you're looking for, which right now are usually around like 75% carb, about 10% protein and 15% fat. It could just be, all right, those inputs you're using to arrive at that, let's switch these things around. Let's move this in and that out so that I'm getting what I need and the markers are showing that I'm heading in the right direction there. That is the next episode I'll do that is similar to this one, and that first one will be hopefully also including some of that blood work and going over some of that and maybe some changes that I'm making based on what information I get from that. But that's kind of the basic training update right now. I'm getting really excited to get back into doing some racing and really test some of this stuff out, both from the training side of things, the new shoe side of things, the nutrition side of things, and hoping for all of it to work out great. But inevitably, we often learn from these experiences, and race day can be something where you learn some lessons and carry them forward. So with the equalizer endurance run, originally that was going to be test run where I was going to run a bunch of new things that I haven't done before between the shoes and the nutrition. And my thought is the likelihood of that going perfect is low. So I'll be able to take some learning from that, carry it over into the training, and then racing at Desert Solstice. And Solstice would be the one where it just had a potential for me to be hitting on all cylinders, so to speak. But based on where fitness is at, I don't want to rule out an opportunity to run really fast historically compared to what I've done in the past at the equalizers if things play out that way. So I'm going to go into that race with the mindset that if things are going smoothly, that I won't be afraid to push the paces to where I think they could be from a historic standpoint down towards into those like mid sixes at times, and hopefully maybe come away with a PR if things go really well. So that's kind of where I got things at right now. If you got any questions as it pertains to this stuff, whether it's the nutrition side of things, the training side of things, definitely shoot me a note, DM me on social media, or reach out on my website at zachbitter.com. Or if you want to shoot me an email too, you can just go to hpopodcast@gmail.com as well. And I will get back to you and then take note of those, because I think those would be fun things to touch on if you're curious about anything on some of these future episodes. But until then, if you don't mind, if you like this episode or any of the things on the podcast, please consider sharing it with your friends, checking out the YouTube or the audio, leave a review, subscribe, share, all that stuff would be great. It really helps me keep the show moving and exposing it to new listeners. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.